Today's subject is a controversial one, not just a controversial one, but maybe the most controversial one. It's a dicey subject. It's fraught and dangerous. It's highly, highly contentious, and it gets to the very core of the tension within Israeli and maybe even more broadly Jewish society. And that is the question of the blanket exemption given to yeshiva students from army conscription in Israel, the opposition, the refusal for some segments of the Jewish Israeli public to enlist in service, in mandatory military service in Israel. Israel, as you know, has mandatory military service for all its Jewish citizens. The Arabs are exempted. It actually is the only country, as far as I am aware, that has mandatory conscription, not just for males, but also for females. And being conscripted means that you are going to defend the country, the state, its citizens for 3 years at a minimum. And even once you're done with your service, you join the reserves. And as we know, during war, you're called back up for service. You report back to your unit in war. And right now we're, a year and a half almost, into a ferocious, multi-front and brutal war. We have the war in Gaza. There was, of course, the war in Lebanon, and now in Iran. And all of Israeli society is being mobilized for this national effort. And of course, we know that the reservists, many of them have served multiple stints of very brutal fighting, and their families are in the dark. What's going to be with their status? How are they doing? Will they make it through? Will they survive? And of course, there's been many hundreds of soldiers that were killed, and many others were injured. And this is, of course, an enormous burden on the society at large. And there is a very large and very quickly growing segment of the population. They're sometimes called the ultra-Orthodox, even though I know many people who are quote-unquote ultra-Orthodox, but none of them call themselves ultra-Orthodox. Alternatively, they're called the Haredi, and that is a name that they accept. And this group categorically refuses to serve. Now, this subject is embroiling Israeli society. It always was a contentious issue, and it seems like it's progressively getting more and more contentious over time. Now, it seems like ancient history, but about a week and a half ago, the day before the strike in Iran, there were long and intensive debates in the Knesset over a law or an agreement or a first draft for the exemption for yeshiva students, for perpetuating the exemption. And it nearly toppled the government because the Haredi parties, they're part of the government, they joined the government, and their primary agenda item is to protect the status of those who are studying Torah, to protect what's known as the status quo agreement. And there was a vote scheduled. This is Wednesday, the day before the strike in Iran. There was a vote scheduled to dissolve the government. And ultimately, they came to an agreement, like a draft or an outline of a law, that both sides could live with, and the government survived. The next day, there's the strike on Iran. Now, in Israel today, of course, Iran and the strike, that dominates the agenda. But I still want to discuss and clarify this very controversial subject. I actually recorded a podcast on this subject, and I wasn't happy with it. I scrapped it. I didn't think I maybe sufficiently clarified or reasoned the argument. So I'll go for a part two, a take two. I took a mulligan. We'll try it again. This is such a sensitive subject, and it's a cause for so much acrimony. And it's hard to argue with those who are very extremely bothered by it. I have to send my kids to Gaza to go fight with Hamas and to, God forbid, endanger themselves And why? For the state, for the people, for the citizens, for the hostages. We have reserves that have to leave their families and their jobs and their careers and their businesses to go fight in the tunnels of Gaza. And then you have the quote-unquote ultra-Orthodox, the Haredi population, that by and large are safely studying in the yeshiva. And one of the names that this is described as is equality of burden. There's a national burden, and it's important that all members of the society of the population, they equally bear the burden. So I want to try to understand, before maybe explaining, but what is the perspective of the Haredi populace? Now we know for sure Torah study is very important. Everyone agrees to that. Torah is sacrosanct. The essence of our nation is Torah study. There's a famous motto that's more than 1,500 years old. Our nation is only a nation because of Torah. This is who we are. Of course, the Talmud tells us, even earlier, almost 2,000 years ago, Torah magno, Matzah Torah protects and saves us from our enemies. So that's certainly part of the discussion. But when you drill down, you find that there's not a lot of dialogue, I would say, and not a lot of understanding of the other side in this controversy. Israeli society at large, the IDF is the institution that everyone rallies around. When you look at like approval polls, the IDF is just the number one institution. And the culture of service is baked into the fabric of society. And then you have a group that they're evading, they're draft dodging. We all have to endanger ourselves, and you're in the yeshiva safe. It's inexplicable to a large part of the society why this agreement, the status quo agreement, absolving the yeshiva students from service is in place. Now, on the flip side, the Haredi society, where Torah is everything, that's the obsession. That's the hopes and dreams of every family, that their children, that their son will become a Torah scholar. And everything in the society, it's a society, by the way, and I know that I'm going to get a lot of people who are going to nitpick with everything I say. That's fine. But it's a society that, by and large, what determines a person's state is their Torah greatness. That's what determines their status in society. And it's a society that devalues materialism and holds Torah greatness and Torah scholarship in the highest regard. And as someone who spent many, many years in Israel and studied in some of the great yeshivas in Israel, and now currently in the United States, in the Torch Center in Houston, Texas, there's no comparison. Well, there's a comparison, but it's the obsession with Torah study that exists in Israel is unmatched by anything else in the world. And the number one agenda for this society, and the number one agenda for the political parties in this society, is to preserve this incredible and rich and glorious world of Torah. So we have this irreconcilable conflict, maybe the most important, or one of the most important issues on both sides. And that's why it's so controversial. And maybe that's why we wanted to discuss it over here. Now, I have found that in other issues, when I try to talk to people on both sides of an issue, I find that there's some common ground. There's some maneuverability. And so far, every person I've spoken to on this issue, I failed to persuade. There's such deep entrenchment and such a failure to understand the other side that it's a really difficult issue. And what's also interesting, this may be a bit surprising for some people to hear, I spoke to people, and more than one person, people, just a sampling of people who grew up in the Haredi world and went to the Haredi yeshivos and don't agree with the Haredi position. The general society may look at the Haredi position and say, this is not defensible. We're all going to war. We're all in danger of we're all giving 3 years of our life at a minimum to the state. And you're not doing that at all. There's no equality of burden here. There's no way for me to reconcile. I cannot justify your position. But even people, so to speak, from the Haredi side are sympathetic to the argument of the general society. Now, I actually spoke to someone who's very Haredi, and he's like, what, this new deal that was reached? It's terrible. It's a total capitulation. No one seems to be happy when it comes to discussing this issue, and many people are fearful of broaching it. If you're going to try to demystify the Haredi opposition to enlistment, it's going to elicit a lot of backlash. And especially now, there's war. And the nation needs manpower. And there is an enormous bank of manpower that's just sitting there. And you're going to compel the reservists to leave their wives and their children and the families and the businesses for months on end to go to the hornet's nest of Gaza. And you're going to try to justify it or explain it or demystify it in any way? Now is not the right time to talk about it. There's blood on the streets. Talk about this subject. And maybe it's going to be counterproductive. The nation is in great pain. And certainly the army serving public, the majority, is in pain and suffered tremendously and is being asked to carry an extraordinary burden. So you're going to try to explain the other side. It's only going to increase the discord, the enmity, and the acrimony. And that's a very good argument. And I was, I guess, somehow I got involved with a discussion to maybe some sort of publication that was approached to write about the subject and said, we're not touching this. This is the third rail. We're not going to touch it. But I think that it's important, especially because I was thinking about this myself. Is there a justification? Is there a rationale? Is there any way to explain it? Maybe it is the right time to talk about it. This subject is acutely on the table, and I haven't heard someone in the public articulate the position of the Haredi opposition to enlistment. And I think maybe this is being a little hubristic. I think I do understand it. And again, I'm acknowledging that this is the most controversial subject, and I'm dubious that I can change anyone's mind on this matter. But who knows? Maybe we could help create some understanding, just the perspective. What is the perspective of this populace, of this segment of the population, and their categorical refusal to serve? Now, it's hard to say that they don't care. You can't say that these people don't care. They don't care about the nation. What do you mean? They're apathetic to the needs of the nation. They're selfish. They're cowards. These are not legitimate arguments. These people are generous. They're good people. The Torah teaches, the Torah, of course, commands to care about your fellow brethren, to love your fellow as yourself. And in general, the society gives a lot of charity, and there's a spirit of volunteerism and generosity that's really wonderful. It can't be that they are apathetic toward the needs of their brothers and sisters and fellow countrymen. So again, this is another reason why it's hard to understand it. This is their number one political objective. They're the only ones advocating for it. They are a very large voting bloc, and they can hold the government together, effectively hold them hostage. You must provide some sort of arrangement, some accommodation for the yeshiva students. And other parties, the secular parties, even the religious Zionist parties, they're handcuffed. They're forced to do it, otherwise the government will fall. You want a government? It's a nice government you got there. You want it? You want to maintain it? You got to give this exemption. So even if you have a majority of the Knesset voting for it. One segment, this is their number one goal, and everyone else is clenching their nose and doing it because they have no other choice. There's no option. And it's interesting because some of the most strident opposition to this exemption law actually comes from the religious Zionist camp. The religious Zionist camp is the group or the segment of society in Israel that's most committed to serving. And they will argue it's a religious duty for us to serve. It's a mitzvah, mechemes mitzvah. Everyone has to join. And unfortunately, members of the religious Zionist communities, they were hit very hard in casualties in this war. And they argue, you can have everything. You want Torah? I'll give you Torah. You want army? I'll give you army. They have an arrangement known as the Hesder arrangement. You could serve in the army and in yeshiva. You could have everything. You could become a great Torah scholar, become someone who's really immersed in religious pursuits, and also serve the country, serve the state. They may vote to approve a law exempting yeshiva students. They're forced to do it, not because they want it. Now, before we maybe demystify the subject, it's important to stress, I think this is an under-examined point. This is not a new subject at all. As long as the state has been in existence, there has been effectively a blanket exemption, or at least a deferral, of army service for all yeshiva students. It's 77 years old, effectively. You come to the army and say, listen, I'm a yeshiva student, Torah is my profession, no problem. Here's your who is it's known, your deferral. Come back in a year. If you're still studying, get another deferral. And eventually, once you age out, okay, you're exempted, go on your merry way. This was instituted by Ben Gurion, the founding father of Israel. He founded the state, and unquestionably the founding father. And he reached this agreement. So it's not new at all. Now, why he did it is the subject of endless debate. Some say, well, at that time, there were maybe a few hundred, maybe even 1,000 students that qualified. And for 50 years, many parts of the yeshiva society, known as what I would call the Haredi society, was in decline. So if it's 1,000 now, maybe you'll be 500 in 10 years from now. Then it'll die out. So why fight over this issue when it's not going to be an issue going forward? Others suggest that Ben Gurion wanted to have the Haredi bloc as part of a coalition that isolated the right wing, the Cherut, the Jabotinsky, the Begin wing of society. Some have said, well, the Holocaust devastated the Torah world, and it was an attempt to rehabilitate the Torah world. I think that's a bit of revisionist history. But that perspective argues that, well, now the Torah world has been rehabilitated, and therefore it's important to have the yeshiva students now join the army. I think maybe an argument can also be made for the fact that Ben Gurion very much understood that the challenges facing the fledgling state are unlike any other. You have so many different groups of society, so many different Jews from different parts of the world that have been separated for hundreds, thousands of years, and they're all coalescing. It's a very mixed society. And if you're going to have a functioning, cohesive state, it's important to make accommodations to the varied interests of the different demographic groups. If you want to have national tolerance or national buy-in and national cohesiveness from all different types of people, you have to have some flexibility and make accommodations. Regardless, this yeshiva movement in modern Israel was granted the exemption, and it's not new, it's more than 70 years old. It's a long precedent, and that's important. Precedents matter. But let's address the merits. What is the reason why the Haredim, the ultra-Orthodox, make this such a top priority and really effectively refuse to serve? We'll see that there are some units that are Haredi units. We'll talk about them in a little bit, but just broadly speaking, they do not want to serve. Now, there are some rationale that have been offered that don't really get to the heart of the matter, in my opinion. I've heard multiple people saying this. The armies they don't actually need that. They have plenty of soldiers. There used to be a motto: a small, agile, and smart army. You don't need so many people. You need a few pilots and you need a lot of intelligence, but you don't need actually many boots on the ground. That is an argument that has been discarded, and it's very hard to argue that the IDF does not need manpower. Some have said, well, the Arabs don't serve. Well, why are you making us serve? Not a persuasive argument. It is important to note, just to have full disclosure on this issue, it's not only the Haredi society that evades the draft. There are actually more secular draft dodgers than Haredi draft dodgers. Of course, it's a larger, not as a percentage-wise, but in absolute numbers, according to the general who spoke to a Knesset committee, his name is Shai Taib. He said there are actually more secular draft dodgers than Haredim who defer their service. So in absolute terms, this is a problem, broadly speaking, not to say that it's the same ratio, but that's important to mention. Now, some have highlighted all the other contributions that Haredi society has done for the country. There's Zaka and Hatzalah, United Hatzalah, Yad Sarah, all these wonderful organizations that are, like I said earlier, the spirit of volunteerism, and therefore they do contribute to society. That's not the point. The point is what are the merits of a very large group saying we don't want to serve? Now, there's a lot of cynicism on the other side as well. I hear people saying this, and this is very painful because it's not really true. Oh, the yeshiva students, they're not really studying. They're just drinking coffee and kibitzing in the yeshiva. Oh, and they game the system. They pretend they're on file for studying. They're enrolled. That's just to defer the army service. Really, they're actually working underneath the table, the black market. And of course, some of that does exist. In every large system, there's going to be outliers. But for the most part, there is a culture of Torah study in Israel today that we haven't seen in centuries. I call it a glorious Torah world in Israel, because it really is unprecedented. And I think it's one of the crown jewels of the state that the state fostered, maybe unwittingly, but the state fostered an incredible crown jewel, an incredible world, a glorious world of Torah study. I've heard others say, you're going to say that Torah study, that's what really saves the nation? That's what protects the nation? Why don't we close the army and just have everyone to yeshiva? Let's open up a branch of the Ponevezh Yeshiva in Gaza and see how that works out. No one's proposing that. In fact, the Chazon Ish, who can credibly be described as the founder of the modern Haredi movement in Israel, and he was the one who really reached the agreement with Ben Gurion, he said that if there is, or there may come a time where we will need to take up arms, the idea that we can negate the army, no one's proposing that at all. So what actually is the Haredi position? Why are they, in fact, so stridently opposed to doing army service? Don't they know the imperative to join your brothers in war? When 2.5 tribes, or two tribes, propose staying on the east bank of the Jordan, Moshe tells them, your brothers are going to go to war? Va'atem teishvu po, you're going to sit over here in peace and serenity while your brothers go to war? It's not a value that we have to say, let others do the dirty work while we remain safe and secure. So why are they so opposed to it? And why can they have some arrangement, some agreement, some accommodation, like the religious Zionist community, where you can have both? You have the Hesder, both yeshiva study and army service. So I think the core of the explanation goes to the purpose of the modern yeshiva world. The purpose of the modern yeshiva world is twofold. There are two goals of this system. One goal, obviously, is to create Torah geniuses, Torah leaders, great rabbis, people who really connect us to study, people who really cut out to become great sages and scholars. Secondly, the larger, more universal benefit of the yeshiva world is to create an environment in which religious fervor, religious dedication, religious devotion, which creates an environment where uncompromising religious way of life can be encouraged and can flourish. When someone proposes, let the ones who are really studying well, who are destined to become great Torah stars, let them stay in yeshiva, and everyone else should go to the army, they're neglecting to appreciate the second point. How do you raise a generation of God-fearing, of Torah committed, of Torah first people? And especially when society's gone nuts, when society preaches everything but Torah and religion and service of God and dedication to God. That's what the yeshiva track does. Even someone who's not a standout in their scholarship, to be in such an environment, in a cocooned environment where Torah values are infused into the student body, even if you're not going to become a great scholar, you'll become someone who's committed to a Torah way of life. Now, in antiquity, this second objective of the yeshiva system, it was doable outside the yeshiva. If you lived in the shtetl, you lived in a small little world, before the internet, all you saw was righteousness and piety and kindliness and devotion to God. You could have enormous generations of people that grow up not becoming great Torah scholars, but committed to the values of Torah. And maybe you can reserve the yeshivos for the true standouts, for the true wunderkinds, a select cadre of geniuses. That was a long time ago, where we didn't have the same sort of social and cultural and religious threats to religious fervor like the kind that exists today. But today, as far as I understand it, the yeshiva system is designed for everyone. Everyone who's part of this society is put on the same track, not because everyone's going to become a great Torah sage, but because if you want to inculcate your children with this, with your set of values, with your set of goals in life, the kind of person you want your children to become, the only way to do it, or really on a large scale, the only way to do it is in the yeshiva. And that's why the yeshiva populace has changed. The primary goal today is to serve as an environment where an uncompromising Torah way of life is ingrained in the students. And people who have that as a priority, they choose to send these yeshivas that have those values, and that's what they want to inculcate in their children. So again, if you want to say that the yeshivos, this is a very common argument, yeshiva should be for the select few, the truly gifted scholars. And they should be given time and all the resources to become great geniuses. That argument supposes that the sole purpose of the yeshiva is for the genius, for the truly gifted, one who can become a great Torah leader or teacher. That's not true anymore. There are two purposes for the yeshiva. And the larger, more prominent purpose is this is the environment in which someone can maintain their chosen way of life. Now, it might not be your chosen way of life, but that's the chosen way of life of this community. And the only reliable way to perpetuate it is via the system of the yeshiva. And that's why even someone who's not doing great in their studies, oh, they're not studying anyhow so well. Maybe they are kibitzing a little bit. They're drinking a lot of coffee. They're outside and they're smoking cigarettes outside the yeshiva, chatting. They're loafers. They're not studying like great scholars. Maybe they learn a little bit, but they're not really cut out for that way of life. They should go to the army. No, the Haredi argument, as I understand it, is that we want them to, even if they're not sages, we want them to become people who live the values of Torah. And therefore, they're not becoming great Torah geniuses, yes, but they will become people who live this way of life in the yeshiva, and that will be imperiled if they leave. Now, there's a second argument, or a second response. Let's have a few thousand geniuses. They'll become the great Torah sages and scholars. Even if the only purpose of the yeshiva was that, who gets to decide? Like, what's the selection committee? The attitude of the quote-unquote ultra-Orthodox world, the Haredi world in Israel, it's not like this in America, I will stress. When I was there, I heard this many times. The attitude is that every single child, or at least almost every single child, can blossom into a great Torah genius and sage. And therefore, even if the only purpose of the yeshiva was to create those Torah sages and geniuses and giants, the argument can be made, well, you have to enroll everyone to know who will rise to the top. Like our sages tell us, Elef Nichnasim, there's 1,000 people who enter the yeshiva, and one of them emerges as the great sage, but you don't know which one. You can't just say, oh, I'll just enroll that one of the 1,000. No, you have to enroll 1,000 to have one emerge. And therefore, so the idea, which is again a very common idea, and it makes a lot of sense, let's let those who study. And those who are not really studious or committed to learning, they should serve. After all, equality, a burden, it's a very legitimate argument. Again, Moshe chides the Reubenites, the Gadites. What do you do? You're proposing to stay here? Everyone wants to go to where you're going to stay over here? It's a good argument. It's a legitimate argument. I will tell you, we have a little bit of a family precedent in this story. My grandfather of blessed memory, he had a yeshiva. He founded a yeshiva in 1948. And he served at its helm for 35 years. Yeshiva called Be'er Yaakov, the wellspring of Jacob. And my father, he should live and be well, was not cut out for study. He wanted to be a pilot. My father's awesome. He's amazing. He's a fantastic, amazing person. When he was 17, 18, 19, he just was not interested in study as much. He studied a little bit, but he was not cut out. So he wanted to do other things. Problem is, you leave the yeshiva, you got to go to the army. So he came to his father and said, listen, you have a yeshiva. Enroll me. I'll be a student, quote unquote, in your yeshiva. I'll be exempted from service. That's what my teenage dad said. And his father said to him, no. If you're not studying, go to the army. So he told him, go to the army. Now, he did ask him to join a unit. There was a rabbinic unit in the army. Their job is to make sure that the food is kosher and the kitchens are prepared for Passover. So he joined the rabbinic unit in the army, became an officer in the army, served 4 years, not 3. Well, it seems like it's a success. He managed to preserve the commitment to Torah values, even though he was in the army. If this could be done on a wide scale, I believe that the Haredi society would accept it. Those who study. Those who don't, find a track in the army where you could preserve your values, your way of life. And again, this is already, I mentioned this earlier, this is already being done to some extent. There are all Haredi units. The Nachal Haredi, it's a whole unit of just Haredi soldiers. There's the Hashmonaim, the Hasmoneans. Very religious. Someone told me, I was talking to someone, he's telling me, send your son to the army. He's telling me, send my son. They'll make a man out of him. This is an Israeli who lives here in Houston. They'll make a man out of him. They'll make him tough. So I said to him, he's in Yeshiva. First of all, he's in high school. Come on. And we're not Israeli. But he was telling me, he's like, they won't accept him to the Hashmonaim. That unit, it's so religious. You have to be so religious to qualify. You have to have a kosher flip phone. You know the kosher phones where it doesn't have any internet, doesn't even have texting. If you have a smartphone, you're not eligible. You're not religious enough to be part of this religious unit. So this is a concept where there could be some sort of accommodation in the army, where there is the service, but there's also the preservation of the Haredi way of life. Now again, it's small. Maybe it can be expanded. Maybe there can be some sort of civilian service as well, where there is service to the public in a way, in an environment, in some sort of framework where the Haredi way of life is perpetuated. A few weeks ago, there was a very interesting news story, a phone conversation between the prime minister and one of the leaders of the Haredi world, Rabbi Hirsch, Rabbi Moshe Hillel Hirsch. And it was a phone conversation, and it got leaked to the press. And I listened to it. And it's interesting because the conversation was in English. Because as we know, the Prime Minister, Netanyahu, he speaks a flawless English. And Rabbi Hirsch, he's American. He's American, went to Israel in the 60s, and he's a great Rosh Yeshiva, and he's the one of the maybe two greatest Haredi leaders today. And they had a conversation in English, and somehow it got leaked. And one of the things that the Prime Minister tells him, we're going to create units where the soldiers enter as Haredi and they leave as Haredi. He's acknowledging that there is a legitimate refusal to serve because serving is tantamount to repudiation of the way of life that this society has chosen. And therefore, what he's saying is, let's try to create, maybe we can't, but let's at least try to create an environment in which it's possible to serve and maintain the values of your community. If you can create an environment where a Haredi way of life can be preserved outside the yeshiva, then the only purpose of the yeshiva would go back. The only purpose of the yeshiva will be for the so-called geniuses, those who want to study. And maybe those who don't study should serve. As of right now, there are some pilot projects. It's not the case. Right now, the IDF can be described as a secularization machine. And therefore, if you send yeshiva students there, invariably, a large percentage of them will emerge secular. I heard from someone, this is so counterintuitive. Let's have everything. The ones who are studying, let them study. The ones who are not studying, let them go to the army. So the argument that I heard is totally counterintuitive. No. If someone is not studying, well, then their relationship to Torah, to the religious fervor of the Haredi society, it's weaker. And therefore, you can send them to the army. They're more likely to become secular in the army. They probably have a weaker religious conviction, and therefore the secularization risk in the army is even greater. The IDF effectively serves as a melting pot for all the different strands of Israeli society. You have people from all over the world that joined together to create a state. How do you have a unified society when there's so many different types of people and cultures coalescing in their ancestral homeland after millennia of exile? You have to create something that unites everyone together. That's the IDF. They're creating not Ethiopian Jews and Iraqi Jews and Polish Jews. No, we're Israelis. It's the new national ethos. That new Jew, new Israeli, is effectively irreligious. Now, it's very Jewish, but where's the Torah? Where are the mitzvos? It's men and women together. And then you might come from a different background, but for Haredi society, this is just not at all tolerable. And even if you have different units, the idea, like, where's God? God is ignored. We know the Torah tells us. You win a war, don't say it's your might and strength of your hand that does it. It's all Hashem. It's all the Almighty. Again, someone who is secular might not be moved by that. But it's important to understand the perspective of the other side. The other side is saying, listen, our values are the Torah. That's it. And the Torah tells us things that are not at all compatible with the IDF. And therefore, if we send our students, our children, to join the army, it's effectively subjecting them to this melting pot, which is effectively a repudiation of religion, and that's not tolerated. Again, the argument of having everything, the Hesder program. Unfortunately, the religious Zionist community, it's a wonderful community, people with immense dedication to the state and to the land of Israel and to mitzvos. The fact is that they are subject to enormous attrition and enormous, almost hemorrhaging of religion via the army. I heard something, again, this is scary to say, and it's tragic, because people that, or a segment of society that's so brave and so dedicated to the land of Israel and to Torah, and to have this be the result, it's devastating. And again, the whole subject is controversial, but this is what I heard. And I heard this from very reputable sources. Something like 50% of the Hesder Yeshiva students emerged from the army not religious. Again, not blaming anyone, but if you're going to put them in a secularization machine, don't be shocked when they get secularized. And why that happens is a lot of discussion about why that happens. They get mixed up eventually into regular units and so on. As of right now, the reason why the Haredi society does not enlist is because of this. It's not compatible with their chosen way of life. Now, I heard something, and again, this I'm not so sure about. Is the secularization a goal, or is it just a byproduct? Is that a value, or is that just the reality, the de facto state? I heard some, maybe it's conspiracy theories, or maybe it's true, that some have suggested that secularization is actually a goal. It's an active goal of the army. I read an interview with Rabbi Eichenstein. Rabbi Eichenstein is one of the premier Rosh Yeshivas in Israel. And I read an interview. It was a Hebrew language interview, but it was translated. It was not published yet. And it's about this subject. And he says other things that we didn't mention over here. But one of the things that he said, this is not necessarily indicative of the general attitude, but this is one of the things that he said. He had a conversation with a senior figure in the IDF. He didn't mention who it was, he says, but this is someone who's in the headlines. And he says that I asked him, if the government, the Supreme Court, the law wants to draft the Haredim, why don't they do whatever it takes to accommodate the Haredi community? And this is what he said. Again, hard to believe. This high-ranking officer responded, "You are naive." After October 7th, there was an awakening of religious fervor that swept the nation. And many people in positions of power, they were worried that what's going to be, the religions that take over, say, become a theocracy. Israel will become a theocracy. You have these Haredi radicals, and they're going to take over the state, and they're going to close off everything on Shabbos, and then make everything only kosher. And after all, the population is exploding, very high birth rates, very high fertility rates. They'll make it a theocracy. And the solution is forced conscription, forced secularization, and you preserve the secular nature of the state. That's a malicious perspective. So for our purposes, it doesn't matter if it's malicious or not, if it's intended or it's unintended. Wide-scale enlistment is not tolerable to the Haredim because it amounts to wide-scale secularization. Maybe that will change. Again, in that leaked phone call, it was mentioned. So maybe it will change. And I think, in my opinion, the position of the Haredi society will change with that. We cannot have a discussion of the Haredi position without mentioning another point. And again, this is probably the least persuasive point to someone on the other side, but it must be mentioned because it's really pivotal to the perspective of the Haredim. In the first war that our nation ever fought, chapter 17 of Exodus, there were two generals. One general is Moshe. The second general is Joshua. Moshe is the leader. Joshua is his disciple, his successor. And the verse tells us, Moshe went up on top of the mountain, and he lifted his hands in prayer. And the further sources tell us that Moshe was waging the war on the spiritual plane. Joshua was down below in the valley, and he was leading the physical campaign, the battle against Amalek. So the first thing it tells us is that our wars are two fronts. There's the spiritual dimension and there's the physical dimension. And no one is suggesting not to do war, not to employ Joshua with the sword. But this reveals to us the Torah's perspective of war is that it's always going to be spiritual and physical together. And the more important component is going to be Moshe, the spiritual dimension of the war. Moreover, the verse tells us when Moshe was lifting his hands up, there was success down below. When his hands drooped, when they dropped down, then there was failure in the war. What that means is that these two sides of the war are connected. And the principal element that determines success and or failure is actually the spiritual dimension. That's what the war against Amalek is telling us. And therefore, and I heard this many times when I was part of the yeshiva world in Israel. And I'm one of the few Americans that actually went to an Israeli yeshiva. Everyone's speaking Hebrew. There's no English. A lot of Americans go like the American yeshivos in Israel. To go to the headquarters, the beating heart, where they're all Israelis. You get a different perspective. One of the things that you hear a lot is that Torah study, meaning the religious, the spiritual components of our national activities, that is what ultimately has an enormous effect on what happens in the battlefront. And therefore, there's a collaborative relationship, even though people aren't aware of this. there's a collaborative relationship with the yeshiva students who are far away from the battlefront. And the brave soldiers waging the war, they're working in unison, maybe even though they're not aware of it. And we were trained. You're in the base matters, you're studying. It's a battlefield. And when there's a war, the semester breaks are shortened. And I remember in 2006, there was a war against Lebanon, the 34-day war against Lebanon. They canceled the Bein Hazmanim. They canceled the intercession break. And Rabbi Finkel, the legendary Rosh Yeshiva in the Mir Yeshiva, he gave a speech, and he cited the Gaon of Vilna, who says that Torah study protects, Torah study saves, but particularly new, novel insights in Torah study, which is the highest level of Torah study, that particularly protects and saves. So he made a call. I want all the yeshiva students to write me an essay, to write a treatise on new, novel insights, Chidushei Torah, as a way of helping the war. He made that call, and I was meritorious to be able to write a very nice essay, a wonderful essay, I have to say. And I went and I presented it to the Rosh Yeshiva, and I got a picture with him, and there was a stack, massive stack of Chidushei Torah. That's the attitude. Is that actually the spiritual component of what our nation is doing, it matters. It matters a lot, and we can have a say. And again, I understand that some people on the other side won't appreciate this. But if you're trying to understand the Haredi perspective, this is an important value. And it's explicit in the Talmud. I'll give you the sources. Again, the Talmud is not a new thing. This was not, this was made available in English with the Art Scroll translation, about 20, 30 years ago. The Sansino translation maybe 100 years ago. But this has been part of our national identity and value system for almost 2,000 years. The Talmud, Book of Makros, page 10a, it's citing a verse and explaining the verse. Who caused, this is a quote, who caused our legs to stand up and be successful in war? The gates of Jerusalem where people were studying Torah. Meaning that the success of the far-flung battlefield is determined by those studying Torah. That's what the Talmud says. And the Haredim, they believe this. They actually believe this. That's important to mention. Talmud elsewhere says Joshua was having a problem with the war. This is in the book of Sanhedrin, I think it's 44, 43, 44a in the bottom. I don't remember exactly, should have looked it up probably before I started recording here. When there was a problem with the war, a hiccup in the war, Joshua's solution was to go to the academy. So this is a very important value that, again, I understand it's hard for many people who are not part of this society and don't necessarily believe the Talmud as sacrosanct. It's hard for them to appreciate. But certainly to get into the head of the Haredi opposition to enlistment, they believe that they're actually contributing, and maybe even contributing more than the soldiers, as hard as it is for some people to believe that. I will say, again, I know this will all elicit cynicism. It's very hard to argue that the Israeli wars have not had any miracles. You learn you read the story of the 6-Day War, even the Yom Kippur War after the initial salvo. Even just this past week, I'm sure you read these stories. You saw these stories. There was the Iranians sent a ballistic missile onto a hospital, which is so barbaric. But the hospital was, just a few days earlier, it was full. And that wind, they decided to empty it. And it's described by the people there, this is a nest, it's a miracle. There could have been hundreds of casualties, and there were zero. But again, you look at the war, like if someone told you in a week and a half, this fearsome, formidable Iranian nuclear threat would be effectively dismantled, demolished, destroyed, no one will believe you. You look at what has happened. Of course, October 7th was a disaster, was a terrible disaster. But in the last year and a half, Hamas effectively destroyed as a military force. What they did in Lebanon, unbelievable. Assad is gone. Iran is weakened and humbled, and their nuclear threats effectively neutralized. I don't think that, and again, the casualties have been very painful, of course, but relative to maybe the expectations, you could credibly argue that there are a lot of miracles here. To receive miracles, you have to be worthy of it. And that means, certainly from the Haredi perspective, a spiritual campaign is underway as well, alongside and in collaboration with the physical campaign. And there are many other sources in the Talmud to this effect. The Talmud talks about the apikores, which it defines in Sanhedrin 99b as someone who fails to appreciate the contribution of the Torah scholars, someone who says, oh, the sages, the scholars, they're just studying for themselves, they're not benefiting anyone else, they're just benefiting themselves. That's an attitude that the sages tell us that removes someone from consideration, from eligibility to Olam Haba. The world depends upon those sages, the Talmud tells us. So even though that may be foreign to you or to people on the other side of this debate, if you try to put your feet, your shoes, put your feet in the shoes of the Haredi society, this is what they believe. They don't feel like they're not doing their part. They are in their eyes. It's been cited a million times. The laws absolving the Levites from doing war are very prominent in this discussion as well. Nedarim 32a, when Abraham was condemned to have his descendants spend 400 years in exile, the reason that the Talmud gives for that is because he compelled the Yeshiva students to leave the academy. You don't do that. Why was Abraham punished that his descendants will have to become exiled and enslaved? Because he drafted the Torah scholars. And therefore, it's imperative, certainly from the Haredi perspective. If someone wants to study, if someone wants to choose Torah as a profession, certainly for their time in the yeshiva, let them do it. Let them do it. So again, I know this is not an easy subject, and it's a very controversial one. I know that. I said it at the beginning. It's controversial. But I think if someone is receptive to it, they could maybe begin to see what the perspective is from this very large segment of Israeli society. The principal point is that the goal of the yeshiva, even if it traditionally was to achieve Torah greatness, and that still is the goal, but there is another goal, and that is to ensure the continuation and the perpetuation of a very fragile system. It is fragile. Faith is fragile. Torah values, we know this, they're very vulnerable to disruption. And especially with society at large. To live with total devotion and dedication to the Torah, to the Almighty, to the Torah and the mitzvos. It's not easy. And how many mitzvahs do we have that tell us not to have your heart go astray, to not deviate after your eyes and your heart? How many laws do we have that are trying to keep us on the right path, in the path congruent with Torah? We acknowledge that taking yeshiva students out of an environment, out of a cocoon that is conducive to perpetuating the way of life that imperils their ability to continue living in the way that they chose to live. And yes, there are all sorts of legitimate arguments. It's not sustainable. It's a very good point. If look at the society, look how much they're growing, look at the exponential growth, and so many people are in the yeshiva, they're not working. What's going to be with the army? What's going to be with the economy? It's a good question. Should the government fund the yeshivos? It's a good question. My grandfather, Bas Mary, was actually of the opinion that the yeshiva system would be better off not accepting money from the government and not being involved with politics. Now, ultimately, that was not what the Torah sages, what the Torah leaders decided. But this is a fair question. The government could say, the secular majority could say, listen, maybe we'll let you stay in yeshiva. You have deferral or exemptions from army service, but we don't want to fund it. That's a good argument. And maybe that's what's going to happen. I think it's a terrible idea because I think that argument fails to appreciate what the Torah explosion in Israel has done for the society. Again, maybe unwittingly. There's something so wonderful and so glorious that was built in Israel. I don't think Ben-Gurion envisioned it, and I don't think that the secular parties that had to clench their nose to sign off on these agreements, these status quo agreements, and to even fund it, I don't know how much they celebrate it. But there's something really wonderful. There's an explosion, a renaissance of Torah in Israel that is something to behold. And the credit is given to, of course, those great sages and the leaders. And by the way, I think it redounds to the whole society at large. Even if they weren't eager about it and they only did it because they were forced to do it, there's a tremendous merit to a people, to a land, to a state, to a government that has chosen to invest in this. You invest in Torah, you invest in Torah institutions, you're choosing to say, I want the Almighty's word to reverberate throughout this whole land. And we treat our Torah sages well, God will treat us well too. Israel has been blessed with so much bounty, economic success, technological success, military success. It's an amazing place. We're growing a dynamic society. It's really a miracle to behold. Part of that miracle is the explosion of Torah, this glorious, glorious segment of society and Torah institutions that are just unparalleled. You know, we have some yeshivas like with thousands of students. It doesn't exist anywhere else. It's just a beautiful thing. And I think it will be worthwhile to maintain that support. And again, you support Torah, the Almighty will make sure that you are supported as well. Just as, and I've said this before, I'll say it again, what America has done for Israel, that I'm sure of it, will result in America being blessed. I always think back to the aftermath of the Yom Kippur War. President Nixon, a lot of people have problems with him. They don't like him. He's kind of a weird guy. Watergate scandal, sure. And there are a lot of recordings of him saying not nice things about Jews. But when the Jewish state was in dire need, he said, anything that could fly goes there. Anything. Whatever Israel needs, we're giving it to them. And all of his Jewish advisors said, well, maybe let them suffer a little bit. They'll position them better for negotiation after the war. And Nixon overrode them. Anything that can fly goes to Israel. And then the Arabs, they launched the oil weapon. They said, oh, America, you rely on all Arab oil, right? Okay. No oil. America suffered on behalf of Israel. So what did the Almighty do? The Almighty made America into the greatest producer, the largest producer, and net exporter of oil. If you told someone in 1975 that America would become a net exporter of oil, no one will believe you. Where'd that come from? Where'd this incredible divine showering of wealth, of energy come to America? In my opinion, it's because the America stood up and said, I am going to support the Jews. God said, okay, you're suffering with oil. You have more oil than what you'll know what to do with it. And we know this, of course, we're in Texas, this oil country. We know this. America is awash in oil and gas, the fracking. I know that's controversial as well. We'll get to the. There's other times for more controversy. But America is an energy superpower. In my opinion, it's because they stood up for Israel. And I think what happened last night, with the president saying, "I'm going to do something that will remove this existential threat from Israel," notwithstanding the danger that it brings, that will not be forgotten. And I will tell you, and I don't want to talk about politics. I know nothing about politics, but I have seen the book of Ezra, and it starts off extolling Cyrus the Great for encouraging the Jews to go back to Israel. And we still read it, still part of our Tanakh. Our people have a long, long national memory. And when there are empires and leaders of empires that do things on our behalf, we remember that for a very long time. That's why I'm not going to tolerate any bad words about Richard Nixon. I don't know much about politics, but I know that when Israel needed something, when the Jews needed something, he answered the call. And something similar happened as well. And again, I know we spoke about this in the past. Biden came to Israel. It has been, at least historically, a bipartisan effort. And I think similarly in Israel, the state has been enormously generous in supporting Torah. That is not forgotten. I'm sure, this might be my opinion. My opinion is that the reason why the country has been blessed with so much bounty, at least part of it, is attributable to the fact that they have chosen to support Torah and to allow Torah to flourish. That's my presentation. I hope that it succeeded in hopefully creating more understanding. I think Israel is an incredible experiment. Jews go back to their land. What a blessing. It's a fulfillment of the prophets. This is like we're living in amazing times. Well, all the prophecies are being fulfilled. We don't know where this is all heading and what's going to be with Iran and we don't know. But it's hard for us to deny that we're living in a time with events that are of biblical proportions. And the society is not united. It is united, of course, in some areas, but there's a lot of rifts, a lot of pain, and a lot of lack of understanding. And I hope that maybe our conversation here could help mend some of those rifts, or at least provide insight, understanding, demystify the subject for us. We have to appreciate, I think, all of us have to appreciate it, the tremendous sacrifice that has been done by the army serving populace. How many people are going to war, leaving their families, their children, their jobs, endangering themselves on behalf of the nation, of the state? We have to do whatever we can. We're far away. We're in the United States. I have friends that went to Israel. Go to Israel. Go pick fruit. Go volunteer. I know many, many, many such people. It's an unbelievable thing to do what you can, to appreciate the tremendous sacrifice that has been done, and to encourage, do whatever you can to do your part. And I hope that our conversation will shed light on some of these very difficult, very painful, very controversial internal challenges and controversies. And I hope the society in general will be a bit appreciative of the perspective of the Haredi society and the value that they place on Torah study. And who knows, maybe there will be some sort of arrangement that everyone could be happy with, and everyone could appreciate what this society can become when everyone rows in the same direction and everyone appreciates their brother, their fellow brother. And maybe there will be a time where there will be units, or either in the army or in secular or in civilian service, where there can be universal contribution to the army, but also to appreciate what the yeshiva students are doing for us, certainly from their perspective. What it all looks like, we'll have to wait and see. But I'm looking forward to hearing your feedback on this. I understand a lot of people are going to be very disappointed just to even discuss this. It's almost like it just triggers something, but that's okay. I think it's if this is a fair subject to get excited over, to get irritated over, even to get passionate about. It's a very serious subject, and I hope that we gave it the proper gravity that it needs, and I hope we explained something, and maybe we emerged a little bit more understanding of people that we may not agree with. So my email address is for the feedback. Send me your hate mail, rabbiwolbe@gmail.com. I look forward to hearing from you and your comments and your feedback and your insights. And please God, we're hoping to hear only good news from our brothers and sisters in the Holy Land. Please God. Again, we're recording this on Sunday, June 22nd. I got home from shul on Shabbos, and my son was like, "You have to hear what happened. They bombed the Fort Dome." I thought, whoa! Like, they hit me like a ton of bricks right after Shabbos. But we don't know what's going to happen, and we hope that Hashem protects His land and His people. And please God, we'll get the hostages out and be able to experience happy times and safe, secure times really soon. Again, the email address is rabbiwolbe@gmail.com.